Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having some fun. Today on Critter Chat, we're going to talk about a large group of birds called geese. Geese are probably animals you've seen. If you live in the United States on the mainland, you have seen them most likely uh, fairly often. There's some good reasons for that, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. Geese are related to ducks, which are typically smaller, and swans, which are typically larger. We're going to jump into that group of animals called waterfowl, and we'll jump in right in the middle with the geese. It's thought that there are 52 species of geese. The science on geese is changing quite often, quite regularly, as they are able to do things like genetic testing and figure out that although some geese look very, very similar, they may actually be different species or different subspecies. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done to kind of figure that out. To further complicate things, there are species of geese that are domesticated. That means humans have kind of intervened in how they live and how they take care of themselves, or how humans take care of them. And sometimes they were bred for certain color traits. And then some of those domesticated species have now spread out and are living in the wild again. So although genetically they may be very similar, or genetically look like this species, they may have the color of something different. They are generally large birds. So a bird, right? That means they're vertebrates. They have bones. Many birds have hollow bones to help lighten their weight so that they can fly. That is definitely true with geese. They're endothermic. They're warm-blooded. But geese are pretty well adapted to live in a wide variety of habitats. Sometimes living in some pretty hot places, sometimes living in some very cold places, and sometimes migrating between the two. They also have bodies covered in feathers, like all birds. Birds are covered in feathers. No other animals are. So if it has feathers, it is a bird. Sometimes people get confused when those birds don't do very bird-like things, like penguins or ostriches. They don't fly. They kind of look funny. They look very different. But yes, if it has feathers, it is a bird. Geese, pretty easy to tell they're birds. They're pretty stereotypical for a bird. They fly, they have feathers, they lay eggs, all those good things. We're going to start by talking about the species of goose that most of us here in the States are most familiar with, and that is called the Canada goose. Not Canadian goose. That's not the right name. Canada goose is the species name. And there are up to possibly 9 subspecies of Canada goose. There's also a very, very similar looking goose that has been called the cackling goose, that also inhabits some of the same range and looks very, very similar, just a little bit darker and a little bit shorter neck and head. They're typically seen in like British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest areas. Canada goose, depending on the subspecies, can vary in weight from like 7 to up to 20 pounds. So they can be very large, with a body that measures about 30 inches to 43 inches. Some Canada geese can stand about this tall compared to me, while others are going to be quite a bit shorter. With that, they have a fairly large wingspan of between 4 and 5.5 feet. So pretty good, but mine's bigger. I've got 6 feet of my arm span, so not quite as big as what I would have. With Canada geese, they can typically live about 20 years in the wild. If they were to live in a captive setting like a zoo or a nature center, they would typically live a bit longer, into their mid-20s, possibly 30s. They are also mostly monogamous, meaning that they typically have one partner for life. They kind of pair up when they're about 1 or 2 years old, and they'll stick with that partner for most of their life. Now, if their partner dies, they will often find a new partner. Um, and sometimes they have some squabbles, or sometimes things don't work out right breeding, and they will sometimes change partners. But the rule is they typically are monogamous. For many years, for many people culturally, geese were a symbol of the changing of seasons. Throughout the Americas and also throughout Europe, there would be these great migrations of geese flying south as winter approached, going to warmer places, and flying back north in the spring as summer approached, going back to cooler places. It was something that people would often very much associate with the changing of seasons, seeing the geese migrate. Migration is a common thing with a lot of animals moving to different regions for food sources, mainly is the main reason for migration, or sometimes for seasonal weather changes to avoid really cold weather, or for special areas that are going to be more conducive to having their babies. With geese, their traditional breeding grounds are in the north. They're up in Canada, some of the northern states of the United States, maybe even into Alaska for the birds that live furthest west. And they would typically have lay their eggs up there. They build a very simple nest on the ground for Canada geese. And they would lay anywhere from like 4 to 7 eggs, sometimes being higher, sometimes being lower than that. And then after about a month of the mom sitting on the eggs, they would hatch. And then both parents are very, very, very protective parents of their babies, called goslings. The goslings can usually walk within a day or two of hatching, and then their parents lead them around, showing them what appropriate things to eat, although the goslings do catch and find their own food. Canada geese typically are vegetarians, eating grasses, grains, berries, and aquatic vegetation. And yeah, from the get-go, the babies are eating their own food, so the parents aren't like pulling the food and feeding it to them. They just kind of watch what the parents eat and learn from that. Typically at about 2 months old after hatching, they will learn to fly, and they are usually very good at flying a short time later, able to migrate with the family when the seasons change. So typically that was having the babies in the summertime up north. They would be ready to fly south in the fall as winter approaches. Now, with all of that, I say typical because in about the last 20 years, that's changed, and that's changed a lot. If you're my age, or if you're older than what I am, think back of where you grew up and how often you saw geese when you were a kid. I rarely saw them, to be honest. And now if I go back to the house that I grew up in, where my parents live, I see geese there often. And I see geese there often at all times of the year. The Canada goose was one time kind of threatened during the early 1900s. They had been hunted quite a bit, and they put in some very tight hunting regulations to help their population grow. And it not only grew, it exploded. And then geese have adapted. They're one of the species that has the best ability to adapt to changes that humans have made. Typically, they live year-round in some locations, especially places like parks and golf courses. And even when I was looking up research today for geese, it says here in LA that they're seasonal, that you can find them during the winter. And I know from my own experience that that is not entirely true. I know where I can go any day of the year and find Canada geese anywhere or any time of the year around here. They will be there because they have learned that there is a good source of food, and they've adapted to, hey, it's not so bad to hang out here. It doesn't get that hot. We can make it work. We're going to just stay here. In some places, they've also learned to do what scientists sometimes call double clutching. So when typically they would only have babies up north, in some of their migratory places where they still migrate, they now have babies up north, and they also have babies in the south. When I lived in Phoenix, at the Phoenix Zoo, they have 7 large lakes on the property, and we would always have geese and many ducks that would come and winter at the zoo, wild ones. Typically about 200 to 300 on zoo grounds. Sometimes they would nest and have babies there, which according to the science isn't when that's supposed to happen. They're supposed to have their babies in the summertime up north, but they would have babies in the winter and early spring in Phoenix. And those babies grow really quick. They're able to learn to fly within 2 months of hatching. And they would have their babies typically in like February or March, and they'd be ready to fly north by May. And they've adapted very well. And because they can have fairly big clutches of eggs, 7, 8, 9, 10 babies, if they're having 7 babies twice a year, that's 14 babies from one pair. They can reproduce pretty quickly. And their populations have definitely exploded across many parts of the US and Canada. In some places, they are now considered kind of a nuisance animal, even though they are native to that range. Some places they are causing some problems in neighborhoods, in golf courses, around airports. And some people and some governments have taken some pretty extreme measures to try to control that, particularly around airports where they do pose a significant safety risk, colliding with airplanes that may be taking off. What else did I want to say about Canada geese? If you've ever encountered Canada geese with babies, if you've seen the photo I posted earlier today, the 4th photo is baby Canada geese that I took at Disneyland. Those were baby geese running around on the pathway at Disneyland. People got very close. I think I cropped it out of the photo because there were too many people in there, but in the back of that photo are the parents, and they are chasing people and defending their babies. And geese parents are very, very protective. I highly encourage you, if you see a family of geese, please admire them from a safe distance. The parents can bite, they can hit you with their wings, they can chase you, they can really scare you, they can go after dogs, they can go after kids. So be cautious if you're around geese with babies. Now, Canada geese are just one species of geese. They're the species most common in North America, but there are other species of geese here in North America as well, one of which is called a snow goose. Now, with snow geese, they're typically very white, with a little bit of dark coloring on their wings. They live in the Arctic during the summertime, so high areas of Canada and Alaska. They migrate during the winter to kind of the middle edge areas of the United States. And sometimes they would find in the flocks of snow geese as they migrated that they were living with another species that for a while they called blue geese. And it took science a while to figure it out. Snow geese and blue geese, they're the same goose. They're the same species. They just have two very, very different color phases. And that is controlled by one gene that they have. And some geese have the gene to be white, and some geese have the gene to be more bluish gray. And they are all the same species, despite the fact that they look very different from each other. And it's not that the boys all look one way and the girls all look another way. It can be a mix of who looks like what. And it took science quite a while to figure that out. There are other geese in other parts of the world, and one of them I'm going to talk about, I've had the opportunity to see in the wild, is the Egyptian goose. That's a goose from Africa. It was typically seen along the Nile River in northern Africa, in Egypt. And it was revered as a sacred animal. If you look at a bunch of Egyptian art from ancient Egypt, you will sometimes see the figure of a little goose. And you'll know it's an Egyptian goose because they have kind of a patch around their eye, a ring around their eye that's kind of a reddish brown. I first learned about Egyptian geese through my time as a zoo employee. We had them at the zoo in Phoenix. I loved them because they were sassy, and I appreciate a sassy animal. But then I went to a museum and saw a bunch of Egyptian artifacts, and I was amazed at how often an Egyptian goose showed up in hieroglyphics from Egypt. Pretty cool that they can be traced back several thousand years in Egyptian art. They have now been kind of spread accidentally around the world. So not that long ago, I went to a little park here in Los Angeles before coronavirus shut down. And I actually saw wild free roaming Egyptian geese with their babies at that park, just maybe 4 or 5 miles from where I live here. And I was pretty surprised to see them, but they had no bands on them. They didn't belong to anyone. They hadn't escaped from like a zoo or somewhere. Eventually, far enough back, either their parents did or their grandparents. But geese have a way of adapting very well, and some species of geese can now be found in many parts of the world, although they were native to an area far away. Let's talk a little bit about a goose called the bar-headed goose. Bar-headed geese live in Asia, and they are one of the highest migrating birds in the world in that they fly over the Himalaya mountains. I'll post some more information about that later today. They're pretty cool geese, but they migrate over the Himalayas. So their winter range is in southern India. Their northern range is on the other side of the Himalayas, kind of in that central Asian plateau and up into areas of Russia. In Australia, there's a bird called the magpie goose. And it's not typically like other geese. It's quite a bit different. In fact, it's actually in a different family of birds. I'm not gonna even try to pronounce it. It's a very long name. It's the Ansarantinidae family. They're the only members of that family left alive. They look kind of like a goose, especially from far away. As you get closer up, the webbing between their toes, typically geese have webbed feet all the way up to here. For these guys, their webbing only comes like here. And these toes have pretty long claws on them. And they also have a good hind claw. And they're actually able to perch on a tree, which makes them a little unique. Also, they're not truly monogamous in that it is often seen that 3 adults will nest together. Typically that's 1 male and 2 females, and together they communally raise a little cluster of eggs, possibly with the male breeding with both females, and they raise the group together. So a non-typical family bond with the magpie geese in Australia. What geese didn't we talk about yet? Let's talk a little bit about domestic geese. Domestic geese were domesticated about 4,000 years ago. They are descendants from 2 different species. So in Asia, they were the swan geese, and in Europe, they were the gray lag geese. And then they were bred to be certain colors, certain heights, certain weights. This one's a little more fatty, so maybe we'll eat this kind. This one has really good feathers, so we'll use the feathers of this kind. But domesticated geese now live across the world and are bred for their meat, for their feathers. Those are the 2 main reasons they are bred. And in some places, geese are still hunted for food, including the United States. Canada geese are still able to be hunted. I believe snow geese can be in some parts of their range as well. Another little goose. This one's kind of fun. I always was amazed. We had them at the Phoenix Zoo, and I really enjoyed watching them. They're called pygmy geese, and they're tiny. They're smaller than most ducks. So they're real little, and I didn't know for a while why there were geese, and someone explained it to me. It's the shape of their bill. A duck's bill is pretty flat. A goose's bill kind of has more of a hump on the top of it, and these guys have a bill that is more goose-like. However, genetically, they are a duck. So sometimes things are called geese that aren't geese. They are technically a perching duck. They also will sometimes nest in trees, along with some other duck species, which I'll talk about in another critter chat episode. There are 3 species of pygmy geese, some in Asia, some in Africa, some in Australia. Super cute little birds, really cool looking, and they're a little more shy, which also made me think that these can't really be geese, because geese are not very shy. Geese will usually come for you if you are a threat for them. I want to end today by talking about a species of goose that I also posted a photo of earlier today. The first picture on the Facebook or the Instagram is a nene. A nene is also called a Hawaiian goose. It's the state bird of the state of Hawaii. And genetically, it is a descendant from a Canada goose about 500,000 years ago. They, in color, kind of resemble a Canada goose, but they're a lot smaller. They certainly have evolved to have unique adaptations, and they are clearly their own species now. They have less webbing on their toes as well. They walk a lot more on rocks, on the lava. They have padding on the underside of their toes, on their feet. They also have claws on the end of their toes that help them to kind of get a grip as they walk around on some of the rocks. In Hawaii, when Captain James Cook, who was a British sea captain, he first found Hawaii, although there were already people living there, so he didn't really find it. He just told other people about it. But in 1778, when he first visited Hawaii, the Hawaiian goose, or the nene, was quite common. He wrote about them in his journal. He talked about them several times. It was regarded as a very sacred and special animal by the Hawaiian people at that time. By 1952, there were only 30 of them left. Not necessarily were they hunted. That's usually the cause for a lot of animal declines. But with these guys, they were decimated by the introduction of mammals. Hawaii didn't have any land mammals that lived there at all until the Europeans and Americans started showing up, and then they brought with them rats, cats, and dogs. Mongoose, they actually introduced mongoose to try to fight a snake off that they also had introduced. Also, pigs kind of came in on that mix. Some pigs were maybe there from the original Hawaiian people, but they usually kept them. Later, other people brought pigs and released them. But all those animals will eat eggs of birds. Some of them will eat the adults, like the dogs and the cats. And for the nene, which usually didn't have to worry about a predator, it decimated their population down to 30 birds in 1952. In 1957, it was declared the Hawaii state bird. And a lot of people took a lot of interest in trying to save that bird, and it took a long time to figure out what exactly they needed. They tried to breed them for a long time at the Honolulu Zoo, and then they realized that the Honolulu Zoo, located in Honolulu, is still a bit noisy. There's too many people around. They need a quieter space. The San Diego Zoo helped by creating a foundation over there in Hawaii called the Ki'aohu Bird Conservation Center. I believe that's the one on the Big Island. I think they also have a property on Maui. But they took into their conservation center 14 species of Hawaiian birds that were endangered or threatened, and they helped bolster their population and have, the nene was one of those, and it's estimated that there are about 2,500 nene in Hawaii today, and they have been downgraded from being endangered to vulnerable. So San Diego Zoo and their Bird Conservation Center in Hawaii are our special shout out today. They've done a lot of great work for several different species, with the nene being one of their biggest success stories. They have also since reintroduced populations onto other islands. They were still existing on the Big Island of Hawaii and on Maui, in the national parks on both islands, Volcano National Park and Haleakala on Hawaii, or on Maui. They have since reintroduced them to several of the other islands, including Molokai, Kauai. There's one more. I don't remember what one it is. But they've definitely thrived and helped raise a lot of awareness. They've also helped create warning signs so that people don't hit them in their cars when they're visiting those high tourist places like the Volcano National Parks. So that's what I have to share with you today about geese. I'll be posting some more information up on the Facebook profile later today, so check that out. And as always, feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to all of my content on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. Until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.